Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Our topic this morning is climbing the ladder. This is an image that we find in the Gospel of Swami Krishna, and in many religious traditions, this idea in dualistic tradition, climbing the ladder to heaven. Otherwise, in esoteric mystical traditions, also climbing the ladder to God realization or to some mystical experience, something like that. It's an image that we find in the Gospel of Swami Krishna, and I was really surprised. I thought that Thakur spoke about this many, many times, but it's just that we did a search. I got Kumar to try to find some nice quotes. We only found 2 instances where he uses this image. But there's so many references that fit in with this idea of climbing the ladder. We'll see. There's so many things that, even though he doesn't specifically talk about it, it seems to be a concept and of course, a very, very helpful image for us to use when we try to understand this spiritual journey. And of course, it goes hand in hand with the concept of the roof. The roof being God realization or self-realization, and then it goes perfectly with this idea of being able to climb back down again. So up and down. So it's very, very helpful. And so I wanted to go through this morning all of the different ways this image of climbing the ladder to the roof are utilized in the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna and are helpful for us in our spiritual journey. It's a big topic, so I won't be able to go into detail with any, but I want to try to cover the very basic type of ground, because we'll see that this is an image and a symbol that can be used in so many different ways and in all the different paths. It has beautiful application to the path of devotion, the path of knowledge, action, meditation, everything. So I'll briefly go through all of this and then one by one. So if we look at it, we'll see that the different rungs, different steps of the ladder also have a different type of significance. We can understand this climbing, going from one to the next, as a process of purification of the mind and heart. So this will be one way when we see this journey in terms of the 3 gunas. So we're starting with the tamas, and we go higher and higher till we reach sattva and pure sattva, and then we get to the roof. So this is one thing. Then we see in Sri Ramakrishna's teachings that he'll separate this ladder into 2 sections on the path of devotion, what he calls Vaidhi Bhakti, this preliminary and more routine type, and this anuraga, this pure love of God, which will be the very final rung of the ladder. Then Thakur talks about very often this idea of going from the lila to the nitya, going from the relative to the absolute, and then being able to come back down again. So this ladder will represent the relative aspect of the universe, which will take us to the absolute level. And we can also look at this in terms of going to the different stages of meditation and sabikalpa samadhi and nirvikalpa samadhi. Then Thakur talks about another concept which fits in with this idea of anuloma and viloma. Anuloma and viloma, I think people know it nowadays mostly through pranayama. This is one of the pranayama techniques. But Thakur doesn't use it in that sense. Anuloma, it'll mean going in the direction of going with the current, going with the grain, and then going against the grain. So it means going in one direction and then returning by that same path in the opposite direction. So Sri Ramakrishna uses this and explains that this going up the ladder in the path of knowledge will be following this path of negation. So he'll explain there's anuloma and viloma in terms of negation and affirmation. So another way of looking at this journey up the ladder. And then we'll get this whole concept of jnana and vijnana. how when we get to the roof, so the concept of the roof becomes very important also, and how when we come back down again, we come back down transformed. So there's a tremendous change takes place there. So we'll see that the concept of the roof becomes important. And can we stay up there? And is it a flat roof? Do we jump over to the other side? Does it turn out to be just a high wall that we're climbing? So we get all of these very interesting things. And then what do we mean by the ladder? Of course, we know it's a symbol of our spiritual path and the spiritual journey. So the ladder will be different. There will be different ladders that we take. Maybe we'll see each and every one of us has our own special particular ladder that suits us, because some of us don't have very long legs. Huh? We just have to have a lot of rungs close together. Some of us can climb very steep ones. Some have to have a nice slope to it. So we'll see that the spiritual journey, going from one rung of the ladder to the next, will involve so many things, the lessons we learn along the way, so many mistakes that we make, so many blessed moments that we have, holy company, all sorts of different things which become part of our spiritual progress and allow us to ultimately get to the roof. So one of the really key ideas is that if you have a ladder leaning up against something, it's not leaning up against the wall. This is a ladder that has an end to it. The roof is here, the ladder is here. Huh? So we know if we get to the end of it, then that'll be reaching the end of our journey. Now, Swami Krishna says that we can't skip any of the steps. He gives a nice illustration of a board game. You know, we play Monopoly, and sometimes you can get the ticket, says it goes directly to go, collect $200, something like that. There's no such ticket. That he says that you have to go through each and every square if we want to get to the end. So each rung has a role to play. Each one is very helpful for us that way. Then we'll see that the step that we're on, the rung that we're on, will be an indication of the spiritual progress that we've made also. That we'll be able to gauge to a certain extent. Of course, we never know exactly how close we are to the beginning or the end of it, but it'll give us some indication, especially when we look at it in terms of the three gunas in this purification process, of what stage we're at, how far we've climbed up the ladder already. So I want to go through all of these different ideas and start with this idea of the different rungs of the ladder representing the gunas, and not simply 3 rungs of the ladder, because we know that, say we get to Rajas, it can be the Rajas that is governing tamas, or it can be the Rajas that's governed by sattva. And then we get to sattva, if we're active people doing good things, it'll have some Rajas to it. So Sri Ramakrishna actually talks about 4. That tamas to rajas to sattva to pure sattva, shuddha sattva. The shuddha sattva will represent that very final rung, or maybe even the roof. Everything kind of merges together at that particular point. So we can imagine that the ground level is tamas. And the whole point with tamas is that we're not even anxious to start climbing up the ladder. So we have to have a little bit of rajas. Something has to awaken us. Something has to tell us that, look, there's a ladder standing before you, and we can see that it goes up to what looks like the roof, and this is something very attractive and appealing. At least have some curiosity. At least get on the ladder and see what it looks like when you start going. So we need a little rajas there. We can't jump right to sattva. This is why I say we have to go through each and every rung. Swamiji is very big on this point. When we're stuck in tamas, that the only remedy for tamas is rajas, is activity. Tamas is a type of lethargy. We don't want to get off the couch. We don't want to do anything. So we need to get active. And once we've become active, then we try to get this rajas to be guided by sattva, all of these sattvic qualities, peacefulness and kindness and goodness, all of that. And then ultimately, we go higher and higher and higher. So this idea of rajas, for those who are stuck in tamas, is a very important thing. Swamiji, one time there's a very well-known incident when a young man came to him who thought he was very sattvic because he didn't do anything. Actually, he was very tamasic. He thought he was very sattvic. So Swami said to him, "Can you tell a lie?" And he said, "No, Swamiji, how can I tell a lie? Sattvic people won't tell a lie or anything." He said, "First learn to tell a lie." So that meant you think you're very sattvic, but really this is just you have no energy, you have no interest in anything. So develop a little bit of this rajas, even if it's guided in the beginning by tamas, and then purify that. So, but at least get the spirit of you doing something. So this is how we gradually wean ourselves out of this tamas through rajas, and then we have to purify that through sattva, and this is also this process of climbing up this ladder. Now, there's a very interesting thing that takes place, because when we go from tamas to rajas, and even rajas to the beginning of sattva, we find that it's a very gradual transformation that takes place. We see that this laziness gives way to a little bit of enthusiasm, and then this negative desires and intentions and things, it gives way to very positive things. But when we get to sattva, we see almost a radical transition, almost as if we get to a second tier, as if we climb up the ladder and what we thought was the roof was a false roof. And then we find there's another small ladder that we have to go after that. Why do I say this? Because the transition from tamas to rajas involves self-effort, and to sattva, from sattva to the roof involves surrender. So it's and I mentioned before the two different stages of Vaidhi Bhakti and Anuraga. So this also, that first part of the ladder will involve tremendous self-effort. We have to do our spiritual practice. We have to really put forth all of our energy to have some higher type of realization. And then after that, we find that surrender and the sharanagati, taking shelter with God, and grace, all of these things come into play. I heard a very interesting statement, not directly, that Swami Nikhilananda used to say, to one of his disciples, that the light you see is not the end of the tunnel, but the beginning of the tunnel. So we're going through a tunnel and we see a light, and we think if we follow it and we get there that we'll be able to leave the tunnel. That'll be our way out. But we get there and we see the light's coming from a different direction, maybe right angle. So then we find out that, there's a turn that we have to make, but they're very short. So it's not a bad thing, but we see this double level type of concept. It comes very, very often. So the second stage, then when we really see the light we see is really the end of the tunnel. This is that stage of surrender, of letting go, something which Ramakrishna speaks about very much. We find this concept very clearly spelled out in chapter 6 of Gita. This is the third verse of the Gita. This Ararukshor Muner Yogam, very famous verse, that if somebody wants to climb the ladder, to attain to the state of yoga, then karma uchate, then the means that we adopt is action. Then it says, yoga rudhasya tasyaiva, for one who has reached that level. So climb the ladder to the first stage, shamah karma uchate, then quietude. Then just type of surrender, acceptance, grace comes into play at that point. Sri Ramakrishna gives us so many different examples. One is the daughter-in-law who becomes pregnant. Now, we can look at this as a ladder with 9 rungs, 9 months. So there's a progression, gradual progression. Each month, the mother-in-law lessens her duties a little bit, but when it gets to the last month, then no more duties at all. So a little gradual transition, and then a little change takes place. And that last month, nothing to do until the baby is born, and then after that, the mother simply plays with the baby. So he gives this example, and then, of course, the bird on the ship that gets on the mast and falls asleep and has to fly in every direction looking for land and doesn't find it, and then takes shelter with the ship itself. Wherever the ship takes me, I'll go. Practices surrender after that. Now, the flying in all of the directions is necessary, even though it turns out that it was unsuccessful. Unsuccessful in finding land, but successful in leading the devotee to surrender. So it has a very important role to play. So that'll be the lower rungs until we get to that very higher one. So there's a very important dynamic. Sri Ramakrishna tells about the boatman, that's how hard the boatman has to work. He has to row the boat out on the big heavy thing, and then he has to get the sails up and tie everything down. But once that's done, then he sits back and doesn't do anything. So then grace takes over. Then the breeze of grace will automatically take the boat to the destination. The boatman doesn't have to do anything at that point. In fact, the entire Gita is based on this whole concept. 99% of it, every rung up to the end, is dharma. Perform your dharma. And then we get to the very final chapter, and it says, give up this idea of dharma completely. Take refuge, take shelter, and everything will be okay. You'll get your ultimate liberation that way. Now, what does this ladder look like, especially this final rung of the ladder? This is also interesting because it's different. Every ladder is different. Every spiritual path is a little bit different, depending on the path itself and also the nature of the individual. If we look at it in terms of the gunas, this final rung will be this pure sattva. And this pure sattva will be really where this sense of I starts to melt away, where devotee is filled with calmness, kindness, goodness, lack of anger and jealousy and envy and all of these things. Perfect contentment. We see this attitude at the very end of Swamiji's life, where we see this idea, yes, I've done everything that I need to do. I have no interest in doing anything anymore. He turned everything over to Swami Brahmananda at the end and said, now I'm free. I have nothing to say. You all decide. He had perfect contentment at the very end. Now, if this final rung is one of surrender, if this represents the end of action, how do we get from that final rung to the roof? Where's the agency there for that? This is grace. And Sri Ramakrishna gives another beautiful example that what we're trying to reach, this mountain, is a magnetic mountain. And in the beginning, the force of the magnet, we're too far away. So the force of the magnet doesn't pull us in. But when we get within the range of that magnetic pull, then we don't have to do anything. The mountain itself will pull us. Or maybe we'll find there's somebody waiting there to pull us up from the roof, to get us to the very top. And maybe feel that that person pulling us up was with us from the very beginning also, taking us the whole way there. Now, I mention this because we'll find a completely different final rung on the same path of devotion, but the path of devotion of ecstatic love and this divine madness. That it won't be this calmness, it won't be this contentment, this peacefulness, it'll be the exact opposite, what Sri Ramakrishna calls vyakulata. Why it's so different for some than others is very hard to say. But in this particular path, this final rung will be this tremendous longing for God realization. This tremendous agony of heart, anguish of heart at not having realized God. There's longing for God the way we long for a breath of air. The Guru presses the disciple's head underwater and says, how did it feel? I thought I was dying for a breath of air. I thought that my life will go. So this final rung can also take that form. Some at the very end will be practically sthita prajna, perfectly calm and everything, and others will be in this state of extreme agitation, this extreme restlessness and longing for God realization. So we find even in the path of devotion that this ladder is a little different, and that very final rung before we get to the roof will be quite different. But we'll see also very different ladders on the path of knowledge and on the path, especially the path of yoga. The path of action also will have its own special features, but I want to concentrate on these two, the ladder of knowledge, and then at the end, the ladder of meditation or yoga, those who strictly follow that type of path. Before that, let me just mention two other things. One is that we see this ladder in terms of the three gunas, and I said we start at ground level and we work our way up. We find many people who are born who seem to be way up on the ladder at the very beginning. Very sattvic people. Yeah. Either they started their climbing much earlier, that we don't know about, or they just could easily get to that level without anybody's noticing it. Sri Ramakrishna tells another interesting story that they see somebody drinks one little glass of wine in the morning and starts singing and dancing and jumping around like a drunkard. And they say, how strange. We only saw him take one little glass of wine. And the other person says, yes, but you don't know. He's been drinking all night long. So we don't know. People maybe lifetimes have been doing this spiritual practice, and with this lifetime, they're not skipping the step, but they're starting where they left off before. So some people do have these very pure samskaras, and of course this is a great aid for us. Then second thing is how do we judge? How do we know what level we're at, what rung of the ladder? I read an interesting thing the other day. Swami Bhuteshanandaji, of course I talk about him a lot. He was quoting from the Bhagavatas because somebody asked him, how do we judge our spiritual progress? Usually we say, don't worry about it. Yeah, let Mother take care of that. But he mentions three things. There are three signs that we're making spiritual progress. That means how far we've climbed up the ladder. One, our love for God will increase. This is, of course, the path of devotion. Two, our attachments to the world will decrease. And three, our concept of divinity will become clearer. Now, what about the ladder for the jnani? Now, those following the path of contemplation, those who are trying to realize the real nature of the self, the Advaitins, the real Vedantins, what type of ladder do they have, and what does the roof look like, and what is the journey like for them? Sri Ramakrishna uses the two concepts I mentioned earlier. There's one of lila and nitya. So the lila, the vyavaharika, this is the relative point of view, that we're going from seeing this world of duality to that level where we see that unchanging infinite reality, the nitya. And then if we go back down the steps, then we're on the level of lila, this divine play, but from a philosophical point of view, we can just say this relative level. And the second kind of sister concept is this idea of anuloma and viloma, negation and affirmation. So on the path of knowledge, what the devotee does is practices neti, the path of negation. Path of negation means that we're trying to isolate the real nature of the self. And we do that by eliminating everything that's different from the self. We can do this in terms of the subject and object, this dirik drishya viveka, with different ways of doing this, but it involves making a distinction between real and unreal. So that's why it's on the relative plane, because it's a dualistic plane. We have two categories, Sat, Asat. And in order to find out what the real ultimate reality is, we negate the other. So Thakur, he brings in, actually this time not the ladder idea, but the steps idea. So we climb up each step and say, no, we haven't reached the roof. And we leave that behind. No, we haven't reached it. Then we finally get to the top, and there we see that the steps were made of the same stuff that the roof is made of. So then we realize that what we negated as unreal, asat, is also the manifestation of sat, of the real. So this affirmation takes place after negation. So for Sri Ramakrishna, this neti neti, or this jagad mithya, this world is illusory. This is for going up to the roof. This isn't the ultimate conclusion. There's a very, really interesting way that Sri Ramakrishna explains all of this when we compare it to very traditional Advaita Vedanta. Traditional Advaita Vedanta will take this idea, Brahma Satyam, Jagad Mithya, these the first two concepts, as a final truth. For Sri Ramakrishna, they're preliminary truths. Not the Brahma Satya, that of course, the God alone is real, the Brahman is the ultimate reality, but that this world is an illusion, or somehow unreal, he takes as something that we hold on to only to separate it from the real nature of the self. And when we get to the roof, then what we negated now we reaffirm. Then we say that this world is also nothing but Brahman. So he says that it's at the time of sadhana, for the sake of sadhana, that we have this concept of the unreality of the world. And it's very helpful. It helps us understand why in the Upanishads we'll find both teachings. We'll find that this universe is nothing but name and form. That it has no real substance to it, name and form. And at the same time we'll find that Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, that all of this is nothing but Brahman. So for Sri Ramakrishna, that'll be a higher truth. That'll be the truth of Vijnana. So we, on this path of knowledge, when we get to the roof, then we've left everything behind. At that time, this world, it's neither real nor unreal. It doesn't exist for us. Then we're merged in that higher reality. And the jnani may find that there was never a ladder to begin with. Like Sri Ramakrishna's, like Swamiji's telling of the Mundaka Upanishad verse, the lower bird finds out, no, I was never separate from the higher bird. I was always there. I was always perfect. I was always one with the Brahman. It's climbing the ladder was getting rid of this ignorance, this avidya that I had. So that may be the type of experience. But for Sri Ramakrishna, it's the coming down that transfers this state of jnana, or knowledge, to the state of vijnana, a higher type of knowledge, where we see that everything is a manifestation of that supreme Brahman. That's why Sri Ramakrishna made a statement which really is a really outrageously bold statement. When somebody asked him, is the world then unreal? He said, as long as you haven't realized God, the world is unreal. After the realization of God, you'll know that the world is real. It sounds like a perfect repudiation of Advaita Vedanta, but it's not. It's really not at all. What he's saying is that our concept of this world is false. When we realize God, then we'll know what the real reality is. So he's saying that, yes, the snake part is unreal, but there's a rope there. It's not that there's nothing there. That's the reality of it. And then at that point we'll see the reality shining through everything. So after God realization, then we can say, Swami Turiyananda on his deathbed was supposed to have said, Brahma Satyam, Jagat Satyam. The Brahman is real, the world is also real. Not this world of name and form, not this world that we become attached to, not this world that we think is some materialistic world, but this Chidghana, this world is a manifestation of that highest Brahman, or manifestation of consciousness. So, this is that Vijnana state. So, automatically we understand now that certain ladders you can go up and come back down. When we get to yoga, we'll have our doubt about that. We get to the roof, can we come back down or not? I'll talk about that at the very end. But here it's very clear, the path of devotion and the path of knowledge. Otherwise, there's no such thing as Vijnana. And the path of devotion, Sri Ramakrishna is constantly saying, first realize God, then live in the world. So we can get to the top. We may not be able to stay too long on the roof, but we can get there and come back down and live in the world after that. So the Vijnani lives in the world, sees everything as the manifestation of Brahman itself, and can live in the world of duality. That means that seeing everything, talking to people, as Sri Ramakrishna did, but with a different understanding, knowing the real nature of the world, knowing the real nature of the self, and never forgetting it, and being free from the bondage of the ego. At that point, this is what he calls the ripe ego. And this ripe ego can be either the ego of knowledge or the ego of devotion, both of them. The Vijnani can also be a devotee that way. Okay, now we'll get to the ladder of the yogi. That means following the path of Raja Yoga, where each rung can be thought of as one of the limbs, Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 limbs. Then the last 3 will be pratyahara, withdrawing the mind, dharana, keeping the mind fixed, concentrating the mind, dhyana, and real meditation. And then when we get to savikalpa samadhi, then we're right at the roof level. We get to nirvikalpa samadhi, we've gone all the way up. Now, can we come back from that? That will be the challenge for us to try to understand. But this is one way of looking at this ladder. There are other ways also. We can look at the different rungs as the different chakras. And the kundalini, climbing the ladder, the kundalini is also climbing that ladder within us till we get to the very top. So this, for the yogi, each rung means raising the mind to a different level, to a higher level of consciousness. At some point, the world disappears, and everything becomes interior. And then reaching that highest level, then everything is merged. Then there's just oneness that can't be explained. And the mind at that point is not functioning. They say manonasha, the mind is destroyed, but only temporarily destroyed, because there's some who can come back from that. Mind will be there, but of course with the transformation. So now, I'll get to that very knotty problem, which I've pondered over for many, many years, because Sri Ramakrishna, he plays a trick on us sometimes. He'll give us all these instructions, how to reach the roof, how to attain the higher states of this and that, and then he'll say, of course, this is only for the avatars and Ishvarakotis. We say, oh, why didn't you tell me that before? And yeah, you can attain nirvikalpa samadhi, but 21 days, the body's gone. Oh, really? That's it? No, I want to be able to do it and come back down and go back in and out. So what does all of this mean? That prema, mahabhava, all of these great states of devotion. No, only Chaitanya Deva could do it and a few others, not for everybody. So then a little doubt comes, okay, so why is he spending so much time explaining all of these things? And telling us to try for all of these things, especially this nirvikalpa samadhi, or any type of samadhi. Do we want to climb up to the roof and then just disappear? Of course, disappearing means from the point of view of other people. Yeah, we may be jumping over to the other side and singing and dancing and everything. That we don't know exactly. Of course, for someone who attains nirvikalpa samadhi, whether the body lives or doesn't live is secondary. Like the pot of the potter's wheel. It doesn't matter if the wheel is spinning anymore, it's already been removed. It's already sitting in the sun and enjoying itself. But from our point of view, these questions become, I'll say, curiosities, because really in terms of our practical spiritual life, they're not terribly important. But if we read very, very carefully all of the different things that Sri Ramakrishna says about this, we start to get a picture of what exactly is going on here. So, I have some observations. The first is that this ladder of the yogi is a little different from all of the other ladders. Because unless the devotee or the bhakta or the jnani somehow enters into nirvikalpa samadhi, then there's no danger of anything. Thakur never talks about having God realization and then disappearing. He said, realize God. Ishwar darshan, Ishwar labh. He uses these two terms. Have the vision of God or the attainment of God, and then live in the world. So it's very clear. And he's not saying this is only the Ishvara Kotis. This is for everybody. So the path of devotion and path of knowledge. We live in the world as a Jivan Mukta. It's just this path of samadhi, this attainment of nirvikalpa samadhi, that he says that ordinary person who experiences this nirvikalpa samadhi will not be able to bring the mind back down again. Now, there's a logic behind it. There's no one there to bring the mind back down. This I sense is all gone. The mind is not functioning. Who can do, unless some divine force does it or some other force. Now, we'll see that Sri Ramakrishna gives several very important exceptions to this rule. And whether he's talking about the highest nirvikalpa samadhi, of course, we don't know all of those things, but he says that there is definitely scope for some to attain this state of samadhi and come back down. And sometimes he would say, because a little karma is left. And of course, give the example of the brick tied to the tail of the mongoose, who can climb all the way up and can look over the little wall there, but the weight of the brick pulls it back down again. So have some experience, but still a little work left to do in this world. So that will pull the mind back down. So this is one example. Then he talks about those who, very good people, who really have some desire to help others. That even that little good type of desire can allow the mind to come back down again. This will be the story of the four friends. And three of them climb the wall, and they all jump over because they see singing, dancing, all this fun going on. And the fourth says, let me go back and tell others about it. So this is not necessarily only the avatar. I won't say ordinary people. Of course, these are special people. But those who have that generosity of spirit, that want to go back and say, yes, this realization is possible. There's a way to do it, that they can also do that. So there are some who maintain a desire to help others, and that desire itself can pull the mind back down from that highest state. We have this concept, of course, in the Buddhist tradition, bodhisattva, that they attain enlightenment, and yet they have such compassion for the world, that they take a vow that I won't accept even my own nirvana. I can be born again and again in order to help others. And this, of course, was Swamiji's great statement, may I be born again and again. Huh? Yeah, to worship the only God I believe in, the sum total of all human souls. So Swamiji had that attitude of mind, even though we'll call Swamiji, of course, companion of a divine incarnation. Then, last observation is that there's a lot of wiggle room in this. And Sri Ramakrishna is a little bit vague and a little bit ambivalent sometimes, and he'll give different types of interpretations, and he'll even say, yes, there's a difference of opinion on some of these things. And it may be that it's not really a difference of opinion, but each and every one of us is different. That our experience may be different, or depending on our spiritual power, depending upon the degree of detachment that we have, all sorts of things are samskaras, that the case will be different for each and every one of us. How long we can live in that rarefied atmosphere of the roof, Some people may be able to stay there a longer time and come back down. Some, they stay too long and that's it. Or some may stay and not have any desire to come back. So we see that there can be some room for variety here. And as I say, I think he's purposely ambivalent about this. And to me, the best example is when Sri Ramakrishna talks about Shukadeva. He mentions this 2 or 3 times in the Gospel. Thakur was talking about reaching that state of samadhi where the I disappears completely. Now the I is gone, who is there to bring the mind back down again? So how can one come back to the world after God realization if the I is completely gone in that nirvikalpa samadhi state? So then somebody said, well, what about Shukadeva? Because we assume that Shukadeva had realized Brahman, God realized soul, and yet had his mission in life. He taught other people, a great saintly soul. So Sri Ramakrishna says, some say, now he'll give us 2 options. Some say that Shukadeva saw the ocean of the absolute Brahman and touched its waters, but did not go into the water. Therefore, he was able to come back and teach mankind. So, we climb up to the ladder, we get to the roof, we look over. Is enough for perfect transformation. We may go up, we may take a quick little stroll, get back down. It's enough. We don't have to, as Sri Ramakrishna says, if we want to take a bath in the Ganges, we don't have to start at Gomukh and go all the way down to Gangasagar. Anywhere we go and we've done it. So we get to the roof, it doesn't matter how we got there or how long we stay, we've done the job. So this is one option. Then he says, others believe that he attained to the absolute Brahman, that he did have that ultimate highest experience, and then returned to help humanity. So, Thakur, of course, if anybody attains the highest type of nirvikalpa samadhi, and the mind gets merged there, then where's the mechanism to bring the mind back down? But this isn't our problem. As I say, it's more of a curiosity. But the real benefit to me of this idea of this ladder is that we have some structure. And each and every one of us will have our own ladder. And it can be a combination that will, and this is the best type of ladder. You know, there's a type of wood they call glue lamb. They'll take, say, 4 strips of wood and glue it together. It's much stronger. If you have a 2x6 of regular wood, any defect in it will be a defect in the whole thing. If you have 4 pieces glued together, they each make up for the other. So they're very strong. So the strong ladder, when we combine these 4 different plies, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and what did I forget? Jnana Yoga, yeah. So this is that spiritual journey. If we stick to it, if we have that conviction that all we have to do is keep climbing, rung by rung by rung, that we'll get to the top. We don't have to worry about what it will be like. We know that this will be the consummation of a life, the ultimate goal of life. So we or at least for me, it is a very helpful way of looking at the whole thing. This spiritual journey is climbing to the roof, and then having that experience, climbing down, living in the world, but with a transformed view of everything. And another very important point, Sri Ramakrishna says, we understand that every spiritual tradition represents a different type of ladder. Sometimes he says even it doesn't have to be a ladder. It can be a bamboo pole, it can be a rope, but everyone is getting to the same roof and having that same experience of that ultimate reality according to their own understanding. That way. So let me stop here, and we can sit for a few minutes. And the other thing that's very helpful, this idea of this spiritual journey being a question of purification. And it's not simply that we go higher and higher, we develop these sattvic qualities. We have to try to develop them in order to get higher and higher. So the more that we can cultivate the calmness and purity and love and compassion, everything, the greater help it will be in getting higher and higher until we reach the roof.